Welcome to Better Sex, where you get the information and inspiration to create and enjoy your best possible sex life. Join your host, sex therapist Jessa Zimmerman, as she brings you expert guests, helpful tips, knowledge, and strategies to improve your intimate relationships. And now, your host, Jessa Zimmerman.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Jessa here with another episode of the Better Sex Podcast. So glad that you are with me listening today. Today's show is going to delve into talking about sex with both your therapist and your physician, potentially, and how that collaboration can really benefit your struggles, can make a difference. But before I get into that, I just want to share my guide that I have written and designed around talking about sex as a couple. You know, if you're having sexual concerns and you are struggling to communicate about that with your partner, this is for you. Okay, it goes into depth about how to prepare for that conversation, how to approach your partner, tools to use in the actual conversation, and then some additional tips that are going to make this whole thing easier. I know this is a tough obstacle for people. You know, you realize you're struggling sexually, but you don't even know how to address it. You know, it can be such a loaded topic. So the guide is available. You can go to sexwithoutstress.com. You'll see it right there on the top. I would love to send it off to you. Today's episode is an interview with Dr. Pebble Kranz and Dan Rosen. He's a sex therapist. She is a family practice physician, both of whom have had, extensive training in sexual health and sexual treatment. And they started a clinic together. So they work together, sometimes with the same clients, sometimes not. But they collaborate, they consult, they're able to take advantage of two different disciplines and the insight and information that each other have to really make the biggest difference for their patients. And while, most of you are probably not working in that kind of environment or have providers in that kind of environment, what we're going to talk about applies to you if you have some sexual struggles, because it's important that your providers be communicating and collaborating and that you're really getting the best of both worlds. So I hope you're going to enjoy the episode and that it will be really impactful for you. The Better Sex Podcast is brought to you by the Sex Without Stress online course. It's a course for couples to escape the cycle of disappointment, avoidance, and pressure in your sex life. So if you're in a pretty good relationship, there's a lot of love and goodwill, but sex is your struggle, this could be for you. You work in the privacy of your own home and at your own pace to create a sex life you can both look forward to. If you want to learn more, go to sexwithoutstress.com/program. Good morning to you both. Thank you so much for being with me.
Thank you. We're delighted to be a part of this podcast.
Thank you.
So the two of you work in a unique situation, right? Being partners in both life and business, right? Could you describe the clinic that you have, the business that you share, and what prompted you to do that together?
Well, we provide a comprehensive center for any issue having to do with sexual function. And so we treat people both from a medical standpoint as well as from a therapy standpoint for issues of sexual function. We also do a lot of education for the community, and specifically education of professionals. I do a lot of work with medical students and with residents, and with other medical providers, and Dan does a lot of educational work with mental health providers about addressing sexual issues.
What community are you in?
We're in Rochester, New York.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we draw from Western New York.
Right. Okay. And so how long ago did you start this clinic, and did you work, separately before you founded that? Like, what's the story of its genesis?
Well, I just before the Great Recession, I started putting on trainings in Rochester and found specialists, because we're not New York, we're not LA, we don't have a lot of international trainers come. So I tried to put on people on stage who were experts, and I found a sex therapist who then sort of turned me on, so to speak, to the field of sex therapy. So since about 2008, I've been offering sex therapy services. And then when I met Pebble, I would talk to her about some of the cases. And she got inspired enough to travel to Europe and train to be a fellow of the European Committee on Sexual Medicine. And that the origin was a sex therapy practice that morphed into a much more comprehensive program.
Wow. Okay. So this whole trail is a story of inspirations, right?
It certainly is a story of inspiration, and also a story of realizing what we didn't know when we thought we were providing good care to people.
Yeah.
So as a family physician, after meeting Dan, I developed this growing understanding of how much information I had not gotten in medical school.
Yeah.
And also he would come home and he would say, this person heard this from their urologist. They heard this from their gynecologist and their primary care doctor. And I would be like, oh, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound okay.
But you didn't have the answer yet.
I did not have the answer. But I knew it wasn't right. And then I would tag along to a lot of conferences, ASEC conferences, because it's something that was fundamentally interesting to me for all of my life. At ASEC conferences, I would hear about how medical providers were so uncaring and uninterested in sexual issues and doing terrible things to patients. And I was sitting there thinking, oh my God, I'm a medical doctor who cares about this. And I think it's important, and yikes. And then I also tagged along with Dan to a workshop given by Gina Ogden, focused on mental health providers. But she was so, in her wonderful way, directly enthusiastic about medical providers doing this work and engaging in an understanding of sexual concerns in a really, truly holistic way. So, and that appealed to me for a number of perspectives. I think family medicine training is really about seeing people in a holistic way.
Yeah.
And seeing people from a biological, mental, emotional, social, spiritual, biopsychosocial way. It really became discontinuous for me that we weren't addressing sexual issues, because here sexual issues are so fundamentally biopsychosocial. So
right. Right. I mean, it strikes me how important it is to know what we don't know. And of course, that's such a blind spot for so many providers, whether it's physicians or mental health or, anybody in any job. We can think we know what we're doing, and it's so crucial to have that door open.
Absolutely.
I used to, when I moved from being a general psychotherapist, I knew what I was doing in the field. But then when I started the sex therapy training, I would remark myself how suddenly all these clients with sexual problems are coming into my practice.
It must be a new phenomenon. Right?
That's right, I know. And this is my experience too. As soon as I started asking my patients about sex in my general primary care practice, I was addressing issues, several issues daily that were sexual concerns.
Right.
Along with the diabetes and the hypertension and the knee pain.
Yeah. So all those concerns are like right under the surface, right? They're so common. So many people are struggling. But if we don't ask those questions, and especially if we're not prepared to handle what answers we get, people are sort of struggling on their own.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing that I think has been fascinating for me is, so So I went to a excellent, pretty progressive medical school. I graduated in 2007. I'm a midlife medical person.
Right.
So I graduated in 2007. I had excellent grades in anatomy. I had no idea that there was an internal clitoral structure.
Wow. Yeah, that's just absent from the curriculum.
Entirely absent from the curriculum.
Wow.
So from one perspective, it's been really exciting to do this because I think that the field of sexual medicine is really just beginning. It's, 1998 was Viagra, and that was the first moment that the medical world was like, oh, this isn't a psychological problem exclusively.
Yeah.
Let's begin to think about this. So there's all this research happening. There's all this growth in the field, and in terms of knowledge, and so it's really exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah. I'm wondering, when you're talking about the sort of the biopsychosocial awareness and getting into the sex therapy or sexual medicine training, has that transformed how you work in general? Even with people that are not necessarily showing up for sexual concerns, or I guess maybe now that's all you're treating. But
in terms of me and my
both of you, but yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it deeply enhances my primary care work, because just opening the door to questions about sexual function within that setting tells my patients, my clients, how deeply important they are to me and how deeply important their entire life and experience is, and that I care about all that, means that it's far easier to take care of their diabetes and hypertension because they know that I care about the real quality of their life. And so it's changed that family medicine as a training is already looking at a lot of other biopsychosocial factors, which makes it pretty different from a lot of other trainings and other medical specialties. But
I would say the same thing, that adding the training and the experience definitely changed the way I practice, the way I think about people, and in some very concrete ways, understanding sexuality pretty much as a component of identity. Certainly when we talk about gender identity.
Yeah.
But sexual orientation, we call it a sexual orientation. It's very much an identity, who I am, who are the people that I want to hang around with, and who are the people that I want to be with my romantic partners. For a lot of people, it's an identity, and being heterosexual has an identity component too. So we really, I think any general therapist would say, I want to know who my clients are. But there's a whole page of that might not be revealed to them without asking and discussing.
Yeah.
I also think about, what is the joy of being a psychotherapist? I don't know who your whole audience is, but what is the joy of being a therapist? And there's, the gratifying things are being the first person or the person that really helped this person with this aspect of their life to identify parts of ourselves, cut off, walled off, not explained, not exposed. And for any clinician who wants to have those experiences, which are so rewarding, sexuality offers a window into that.
Yeah. And while I know I certainly have therapists that listen to the podcast, of course, it's largely geared to just sort of regular old people, and I'm thinking for anybody that's in therapy or seeing a physician, I mean, they're probably not getting asked these questions a lot. Do you have any thoughts about how people might bring this stuff up and make sure that this is attended to?
I think there's a balance. So there's a balance between advocating for getting the care you want. But I also think that if you're vulnerable, you might not be in the best place to advocate for yourself. Because
right.
You're vulnerable to be harmed. So, if someone has been wanting to say something that's very precious and vulnerable to them, they might want to start with people that there's a guarantee they're going to get the kind of response that's going to be enthusiastic. That being said, everyone's entitled to good mental health and medical care.
Right.
So I'm respectful of the dilemma, and I'm sure I address things better now than I did 15 years ago.
What would you advise people that are listening that might have sexual concerns, whether it's a medical issue or anything else, around finding somebody who's really going to be able to help them and be able to hear them?
So first off, I would recommend becoming aware of the medical societies that are training people in issues of sexual medicine. They all mostly have provider listings. So the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, the Sexual Medicine Society of North America, the International Society of Sexual Medicine, they all have provider listings. And while they don't have necessarily, there isn't necessarily a certification that all of those bodies give, the way that ASEC gives certification to sex therapists. They do at least identify people who have made it their business to care about these things. So, so that's one thing that I would recommend. There's a difficulty in the U.S. There's no medical specialty. There's no board certification for sexual medicine. The sexual medicine in Europe does have this certification, a fellow of the European Committee on Sexual Medicine, that is across disciplines. So if you want an endocrinologist who knows about sexual medicine, you look for somebody who's a fellow of the European Committee on Sexual Medicine. If you want a psychologist, you're looking for somebody who's certified by that body. If you're looking for a psychiatrist or a primary care doctor, a urologist or a gynecologist, they're training people from all medical perspectives in sexual medicine and have this certification. And in the U.S.,
there's ASEC for
mental
health professionals.
Right.
Well, and sexuality counselors, right, who are often medical providers who are getting that training and certification in the U.S.
That's true. That's true. I think that medical providers as a whole who care about sexual medicine don't all know about that avenue through ASEC to get the word out. But, I think that it's important. So beyond that, it's important to know what doctors don't know about sexual function and know that it's of no fault of their own. They didn't have access to the training,
right?
Large. So, some aspects of any anatomy that has to do with pleasure, we don't get particularly good training about. Aside from first-line treatment for erectile dysfunction or pelvic pain, we don't get a whole lot of great training about. They might not know about the impact of medications or procedures on sexual function. Again, not because they don't care, but just because they don't have the information.
Right.
They may not know about less widely used treatments or up-and-coming treatments. For instance, treatments for sexual desire in women, treatments for Peyronie's disease, which is a problem that happens with fibrosis, with a healing problem in the penis. They may not know about hormone therapies. They may not know about menopause medicine. They may not know what sex therapy is.
Right.
They may not think that the experience of pleasure is a part of the job of a medical provider.
Yeah.
They may think that if you have a concern, you're going to be the one to bring it up. And they may be overwhelmed by all the other things that you have to address. So,
and I'd imagine they're facing very, very short appointments that need to be focused on the medical presentation. Our healthcare model, it seems to me, barely leaves space to have these conversations with a physician.
Right. So, and insurers, insurance companies don't always reimburse not only for treatment, but for the assessment and diagnosis of sexual medical concerns.
Right.
So, I think that while it's important to know all that, I think it's important too for patients to advocate for themselves and say, this is an important part of my life. It's affecting my quality of life. I realize you may not know a lot about it, but I want you to learn.
Yeah.
I need this help to improve my life.
So ideally, people can find a provider at one of, I think we should put these links in the show notes too, right? For all these organizations, including ASECT. Ideally they find somebody. Otherwise, they really may have to insist, advocate for themselves and insist their physician learn something about it or do some of their own research.
I agree, but that can be hard. I'd also add the National Coalition of Sexual Freedom. And then, there's going to be for people who are thinking about consensual non-monogamy, that is
right.
Changing the fidelity agreement. There's going to be certainly meetups or there may be specific organizations in their community to talk about that. The internet really opens it up for people to do a little bit of provider shopping. Of course, as Abe Lincoln said, you can't trust everything you read on the internet, but sometimes it's discerning minds to figure out what's helpful.
Right. And Dan, do you have a similar list of what mental health providers don't know? I mean, in general, if you aren't a specialist in this, like what are these blind spots that so many therapists might have?
It's a confusing question because I had blind spots. So I think to a great extent, there's a lot that we're just not taught. There's no question. And I went to social work school a number of years ago, but I don't think that the human sexual response is taught. There's no sort of anatomy and physiology in social work school.
Right.
I can't speak to the other, like you've interviewed people from a variety of other professions, but
yeah, certainly there was none in my master's degree to be a therapist, right? Zero. Yeah. So yeah.
So it's the movement to around inclusivity and diversity is phenomenal and has rectified so many problems. But there's also a problem of universality that pretty much everybody has genitals, and mental health providers aren't necessarily trained how those work. And the brain is the largest sex organ, or the skin is the largest sex organ. So what is the sexual relationship there? I think that those things are often absent. And then, so how do we discern what is my value system versus what is an evidence-based practice or something that is maybe following the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm?
Yeah.
And so the values clarification kind of work, I don't know if that's the right phrase, but the trying to identify biases, and then we can't get rid of them, but we want to understand them. We want to know where we're strong and where we're not.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great question what general mental health professionals should know. Stephanie was one of your previous guests. You talked about her book on that. I know you were talking about fertility and that issue, but what every mental health professional should know about sex.
Right.
A relatively comprehensive resource for that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking that might be an interesting, I mean, I don't know if regular old people who aren't therapists, they might be interested in that book. Even though they're not going to put it into their work, it's like it might help round out people's own understanding, or in working with, advocating with their own therapist, it might give them a tool for that conversation.
I think there's a big clue, which is that they don't get asked.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true, right? Yeah.
Their mental health provider may not know.
I mean, let's talk about a really sad reality is that it costs us it costs the expenditure to get where we are is phenomenal.
In
Yeah.
terms of being a sex therapist, in terms of being a sexual medicine specialist.
Yeah.
And so that there's an unfortunate reality is that a lot of communities can't afford to support people who've invested so much money in their career. You drop $25,000 on becoming a professional. Maybe you want to go off the insurance bill. So I have a tremendous sympathy, and there's a real need as wonderful as certification is, there's a real need to push down information to people who are working in clinics, who are working for Medicaid only, who are in low-cost communities, low-cost primary care communities, so that the majority of people in this country can have access to this.
Yeah.
And I probably shouldn't say area of ignorance on a podcast, but I don't know if there's sort of an organization that has oriented itself that way. ASEC does certification, but I don't know if there's I don't know.
Not that I know of. I mean, is that part of the aim of the training that you two are doing in your community? Trying to just sort of disseminate the information to as many providers as possible without an eye towards certification or anything?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We hope to train ourselves out of jobs.
Well, a caveat. I mean, I think we have a that if you look at the implicit model, which people may have heard of, the first step is permission, limited information and specific suggestions. But for intensive treatment, you do need to go to the top specialists, the people who have training. But there's a lot of sexual issues that can be handled in generalist practice. Right. And we put on a sexual assessment reevaluation training in town. We had 30 providers. None of them were specialists in sexuality who came to the training. So we have tried to push that in. And I know there's other clinicians who really, really try to speak to the other disciplines too.
Right. It's Jessa here, just taking a quick break. Thanks for listening. Are you interested in being a guest on the show? I'm always looking for people with expertise to share that could enrich other people's sex lives. And I'm also interested in hearing from people who have transformed their own intimate relationship and would want to share their story with my listeners. So if you've got something to contribute to the discussion and want to see about being featured on an upcoming episode, please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, and check out the Be a Guest details. You'll find everything you need there. So I'm wondering, I'm imagining people listening to this, if somebody's struggling with a sexual problem, they may see their physician and have this conversation. They may see a sex therapist and have this conversation. And even though I refer to physicians in my own practice, there's not a lot of collaboration, but there the two of you are working in your clinic together, right? Can you speak to sort of how often and how you share the work with any particular case and what that, sort of what that allows, I guess?
Pebble's going to have a ton to say on this, but you've come to the right interview. She's a physician who wants to sort of bridge those gaps for people throughout the country between mental health and sex therapists and mental health.
Yeah. Well, so I think we have a really fortunate situation. We talk a lot, sometimes at work, sometimes in the kitchen. And we do a lot of talking about cases that we share. We case consult with each other about cases that we're not sharing to make sure that we're giving the best, most well-rounded care. That there isn't, Dan will have somebody who he's concerned there might be a medical issue. Is this medication perhaps a part of this? And they had this procedure. Could this be affecting their sexual function? And I'm able to consult on that. And I have, in my evaluations with people, which are generally start at a 90-minute session, I often come out with a lot of questions about psychological processes that are contributing, and Dan consults on those issues. So we have this very fortunate situation where we're very non-hierarchical. It's not like he's a therapist who works for me, the doctor, and I might I tell him to do an assessment and then I'll take care of the medical bits. That's not at all how we work.
Yeah.
But there are tools to help general psychotherapists and coordinate with medical providers better. And they're pretty simple. I'm really fortunate in that my residency training program is committed to training mental health providers alongside family physicians and looking at the whole medical system. One of the chairs of our family medicine department was recently head of the American Psychological Association, Susan McDaniel, very committed to integrating mental health and medical care. And the department sees the value deeply of that integration. And so we get taught how to work with medical providers as family medicine physicians. So one of the things we talked about is how the languages that mental health providers and medical providers use are different. And sometimes we need to do some work to bridge those gaps. Now, mental health providers tend to be the better communicators, so it's often the onus on them to figure out how to talk with the medical provider.
Yeah.
And there are simple things like knowing, a medical provider receiving a one-page letter that says, this patient of yours is working with me on this issue. They don't need to go into the details of that issue. They can be very succinct in that letter. Lets the medical provider know that there's a resource out there. And in the medical world, we expect that closing of the communication loop with providers, other providers in the community who are also working on our patients. Primary care providers take a lot of pride in knowing our patients well. And so it's really helpful to hear from a mental health provider what is, that they're engaged in helping them with this particular area. And it's also helpful to just know when a mental health provider is finished working with a client too.
Okay.
And whether or not there's still work to be done, or whether there is a sense of we've taken care of this. This is an issue. Medical providers generally do want to communicate. Part of the difficulty is, as a primary care provider, I receive thousands of pieces of paper on thousands of patients in a week. So I am getting that information and making sure it's sort of in my head and into the chart, but there isn't a way to always communicate back with the person who has provided that information. I'm a medical provider who likes to get on the phone with therapists because I like therapists, but a lot of medical providers would find that very overwhelming.
Yeah. I mean, I hearing you, I'm thinking, well, first of all, I'm thinking I need to do more of this in my own practice, make sure I'm connecting with the physicians, because it's really interesting to hear your perspective. But I'm also thinking this might put the onus back on the client, that if you're seeing both a doctor and a mental health, provider, to ask them to write that letter, to bring it up in both places, to sort of bridge that gap a little bit. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And to tell a medical provider, I need the notes from your. We had a conversation about my low sexual desire. I need the notes and labs that you did having to do with that, so that I can bring them to my therapist, so my therapist knows that I've talked with my doctor.
Yeah. Do either of you, I mean, this is sort of off the cuff, so maybe nothing will come to mind, but do either of you have a story to illustrate the impact the other person was able to have on your treatment in a case?
So there have been cases where somebody, a person comes for an issue like premature ejaculation in a couples setting to Dan, and lifelong premature ejaculation is a very hard issue to address without a medical intervention. And we've had times where Dan is making progress with helping with communication in the couple, but there's still this sexual concern that is getting in the way of the client's well-being. So I've seen that client, and we take care of the medical aspects of that. I'm also able to sometimes put some people at ease with regard to their sense of being broken in a way that other providers can't. So to hear from a doctor, this is not anything you did to your body with masturbation.
Right,
it
right.
Is your genetics. And that's, we can take care of, we can take care of this. We can help you with it while you continue to do this important work in therapy, on your relationship, on your sexual communication. But without that sense of well-being, is really elusive for somebody with those.
Yeah, I'm imagining how impactful it is to hear from two different providers, two different views in the room, that nothing's broken, that you're okay, you're not broken or inadequate, because I'm sure you're telling them the same thing, Dan, right?
Yeah.
It is true that sometimes people hearing it from a doctor, it sinks in a little deeper faster. But I think that's a good example of.
Yeah.
We've had cases of couples who've had some pretty difficult sexual pain issues, and being able to work closely together on those issues has been really important. And I can't imagine how people in a less collaborative environment could have gotten people to a place of health as fast.
Right.
Mutual reinforcement is helpful.
Yeah, and two different views, or I guess like doors into the problem.
What I think about, trying to listen with the ear of someone who might be in the audience. You're hearing a lot of how there's inadequate training and scarce resources. I think that it takes time for people to understand themselves, to go public to some extent, or to seek out help. So, the classic conception of a man suffering from a mental health condition or a sexual condition, just not going to say anything.
Right.
Very real sort of built his career around that kind of thing. And for women, there's a lot of silent suffering, a lot of silent pain that people don't know about. And so the people who are listening, like, where's their help for me? What's the it gets better version? If we surround ourselves with information that's sex positive, that is affirming of who we are and our rights, that know that the World Health Organization squarely stated sexual pleasure and reproductive rights and freedom from oppression and exploitation are considered a world right.
Yeah.
And that we have to try to push forward. And there is information out there. There's a lot of books. There's a lot of podcasts. I mean, the service that you're doing is incredible with this. But it takes, sometimes I know that I've had to hear things several times from several different sources to know that either I'm okay or that I need to look at something in
right.
both ways.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I think my last question is just whether the two of you have, I don't know, if you've been able to facilitate or advocate for some other partnerships like you have around the country. You're in a unique situation, but is it a model that you've tried to copy anywhere else?
Well, I think we're probably going to say the same thing. We're dipping our toe in. We're presenting at ASEC's annual conference in June on our collaborative model. Our proposal was accepted, and
there's a chapter in a book that's coming out for therapists about working more collaboratively with and other doctors. it would be hard to say that, all of the spouses of sex therapists
right.
physicians should get on that.
Yeah, we're not all married to a physician.
We're a little evangelical about it. So we're you're on the resource page is going to be our website, and we're squarely available for consultation around collaborating, right?
Oh yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah. And I think that I do think from being a part of many of these international sexual medicine societies that there is an understanding that sexual medicine physician can't do this alone, and that we really need to create a resource that addresses the whole person, the whole couple system, and people in sexual medicine, much like sex therapists, tend to be pretty passionate about this topic and really want to move things forward. I think it'll become a much more common resource to have both sexual medicine specialists as a medical resource and centers that really integrate the care that's possible.
Yeah. Great. Well, I will make sure also to put, in the links in the show notes, have your website as well as some of these other organizations we've mentioned. I'm just so grateful for you taking the time today.
Oh, we are delighted. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to Better Sex. Please visit our website, bettersexpodcast.com, for show notes and additional episodes.
And that's a wrap for today. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. If you are enjoying the podcast, if some of this material resonates with you and you would like to make a difference and make sure that this keeps coming out in the world once a week, ongoing, there are a couple things you could do to show your appreciation. The first would be to go to iTunes and rate and review the show. That really helps us be found by new listeners when you review the show on iTunes. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/iTunes. The other thing I want to invite you to consider is becoming a Patreon. For a small monthly pledge, you get some benefits. So for $2 a month, you get advance access to every single episode. For $5 a month, you get a chapter of my upcoming new book. And for $10 a month, I host quarterly get to know you and question and answer chats over the web, and you get invited to that. I would love to have your membership in that, become part of the Better Sex family. You can find a link at bettersexpodcast.com/Patreon, which is Patreon. Again, thanks for listening. I'm glad you're here. Feel free to comment, ask questions, get in touch. I'd love to hear from listeners. Thanks.